everyone. Welcome back. It's the MBC, Married Black and Carnivore, and we will be transitioning to Mr. and Mrs. Carnivore, Carnivore B and D. Today's episode, we will be discussing how carnivore has impacted mental health in our family, especially with my wife and me also. Um, just as important for the women to listen, because this will be mainly D's portion. Men, you should listen also. This will go over some good points, and it might be able to help someone out with some issues they might be going through. And also, I'm proud of my wife. She's made leaps and bounds on carnivore, and she believes, and I believe, it's all due to her nutrition. So we look forward to you enjoying this episode, and hopefully someone can get some much needed information out of it.
All right, so the mental health journey on carnivore. So just a little bit of background and history. We haven't really talked that much about ourselves beyond us as a married couple, but B and I each have children that we brought into our marriage. He has two sons that are teenagers, and my son is actually 30 in his early 30s, and so he's grown and has his own son who is an amazing little boy. And so we've had our own journeys prior to coming together. And so my journey was that of being a single mom for many years. And it's funny, one of the things that I was talking to my son, it was either just before my grandson was born or just after, and just having those conversations around parenting as he was entering into that journey of becoming a father. And I remember saying to him, we were talking, I said, if there's anything I would have done differently. I mean, as parents, there's usually several things we would do differently if we could do it all over. But if there's any one key thing that I would have done differently, is that I would have smiled more. I was grappling with so much stress as a single mom that I think I missed a lot of opportunities to just be at peace and smiling more in the presence of my son. There's so much that you juggle as a parent in general, regardless of whether you're a single parent or whether you are married or whatever the scenario is. And or co-parenting, because you can be a single mom in terms of your child living with you and have a great dad who's co-parenting with you, in a different residence. The thing though is parenting in general, it requires a tremendous amount of energy if you're aiming to be intentional about it, if you want to be a good parent. And so, I told him, I said that would be one of the key things that I would have done, is just pause, breathe, and smile more. And I, hope that if there's anybody watching this who is a parent, whether you have adult children or particularly though if you have young kids, just to remember to smile, to really look in their eyes and smile and let them know that everything is okay. And even in the midst of challenges, because we all have challenges, and but that would be probably the thing that as I got older, I realized I wasn't really smiling as much as I thought I should have. And so before I talk about my mental health journey, I want to talk about the science of what I'm learning around mental health and how it's tied to metabolic health. And that, I happen to be a person of faith. And so you can pray, you can, have a great attitude, but if you are metabolically challenged, then it can feel like, and it can be an uphill battle in terms of your mental health. And so I just want to recommend that take some time to listen and watch some very specific folks out there who are medical health professionals and who do talk about metabolic health as it relates to mental health. And that's first and foremost Dr. Chris Palmer. I've watched so many of his videos. They have been immensely helpful for me. Because when I begin to understand things from a very practical scientific standpoint, or just how it all works outside of me and not specific to me, then it makes it easier for me to apply it to myself. And so Dr. Chris Palmer, who is a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, still in practice, and I believe, and then Gary Taubes, who's actually an investigative reporter, who kind of broke out or broke open or, you know, did a lot of work to help expose a lot of what's been going on in the medical community. And not saying that, you know, doctors or the medical community is doing anything intentionally wrong in terms of their guidance toward us on nutrition, but just exposing how things have happened that have led us to where we are, as far as, you know, how obesity and the government recommendations are completely, you know, tied to one another, and that things that we often blame on ourselves, it really is a function of, with good intentions, a lot of misinformation over the last 40 years around being low fat, about being, you know, doing the grains and all these other things that were put as a priority on our nutrition. And those are the things that began to really impact our obesity, affect our mental health. And when we begin to see it that way, it helps you to forge through more effectively on then addressing your own stuff. Um, and then Dr. Jason Fung, who a lot of people already know about as well, he's a nephrologist, a kidney doctor who is very, very knowledgeable and an expert on fasting and reversing diabetes and other metabolic issues through nutrition as well. Low carb, high fat regimen. So, you know, he is someone who I think just has very down to earth, very practical way of talking about these things that's really helpful. And so, Gary Taubes, an investigative journalist on the tie between obesity and, you know, the medical world, and what we've been educated on or told to do over the last several decades. Dr. Chris Palmer, his discussions are often around keto or low carb or carnivore as it relates to mental health and results that they're getting with patients. And then Dr. Jason Fung around reversing diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes and other metabolic health issues with fasting and nutritional approaches. So I think it's really important that we get educated on the very, at least, basic science of things, so that, again, it's not just about, well, this is just me and my issue. This is a collective issue that is plaguing us in this country when it comes to our weight, when it comes to our mental health, when it comes to our other medical issues. And so much of it, if not almost most of it, I don't want to say all of it, but most of it could be addressed with how we are how we're treating our bodies with nutrition. So anyway, I wanted to say that, you know, how I kind of got led to carnivore, and I'm going to use my notes here, so you're going to see me looking down, because I want to make sure that I stay on track and get some really key things included in this conversation, because it is very, very near and dear to my heart. Now, I was never diagnosed coming up with any mental health issues or even in my adult life. But when I look in the rearview mirror and in hindsight and look at whether it's feedback that I've received, more so from some immediate family, and I'm going to be very generic when I talk about family, because we have not even shared with our friends and family what we're doing. And so I want to be really respectful about how I talk about certain things, because, you know, if I were in their shoes, I wouldn't want someone sharing things about me if I hadn't given them expressly my permission. So I will speak in very generic terms And when it comes to our family, because you know, we're still in the beginnings, kind of part of doing all of this, and as far as being public with our journey, and we want people to see this only if they are seeking out this type of information, or if it's with shared with them by someone who thinks it would be beneficial to them. So for me, my journey on carnivore really began a little bit out of desperation for my overall health. My weight had started to creep back up, and I think it was like around 250 something. I hadn't weighed myself, so it might have been more, but my last known weight I think was like 250. My highest weight on record is 285, and that was probably 20 years ago. So I've been on this weight loss and health journey for many years. And my lowest weight as an adult was probably like 189, but I think I might have been in my early 20s when my son was very young. In the recent history, my lowest weight, maybe about 10 years ago, was I think 209 was the lowest I got down to. And so I've typically hovered around, like the 220s, 230s, and then sometimes would creep up to those 240s, 250s, 260s. And so anyway, um, we have a business, a family business that I started, and it is a bakery. We'll do episodes on that completely separate from this about some of the conflicting thoughts I have about that. Um, and it's grueling. It is grueling. It is grueling. I'm on my feet most of the day, sometimes working through the night. And I could tell that my body was shutting down, and I had been having some difficulty and have had struggled with difficulty with just when I get overwhelmed, what that looks like. It becomes a very intense kind of thing for me. I have a difficult time when I'm overwhelmed with, fatigue and, so many things on my plate and wearing a lot of hats. I can become someone who either is like very intense or who just shuts down altogether on certain people. And I just focus on the things that are right in front of me and that I have to address and deal with. And so I think I'd mentioned in a previous video, my mom passed a couple of years ago. We got married, shortly after that. I became a grandmother that same year, and that was also all during COVID. That was in the midst of COVID. And so, 2020, 2021. And it was a lot. And we were going through renovations of the house that we recently bought. And so it is, to say the least, it was just a lot. And then basically I was a startup company in terms of going into retail space with our bakery. And so it was just a lot, building a team, a staff, and I could tell that I was just really struggling. And I just would say, even to my husband, I'm like, I am not okay. I am not okay. But when you say that to people, they don't really know what that means. And I think they also don't really know how to process that. Some things additionally happened personally for me that was really, really hard. And so I started carnivore. Didn't tell my husband because I was seeking to A, lose weight, and B, just be healthy. And one thing that I had heard and that I knew about carnivore is that it is amazingly helpful for your overall mental health. And so I started on that journey. Again, there were a lot of things going on at that time, and some of those things in particular I was really, really struggling with. And I found myself literally weeping almost every day, just not in front of others other than my husband. My husband is the only one that saw this. My whole sense of self was deeply, deeply damaged, and I was really, really struggling. And it was scary to me, actually. And this was even happening in the beginning of carnivore. Now, at that time, carnivore for me just meant cutting out the sugars and the plant foods. Um, but I was still doing dairy, I was still doing sweeteners, and I was still doing coffee. And so for about 4 months, yeah, I was in a pretty really rough space. And then the third month, I was losing weight. Don't get me wrong, carnivore was helping tremendously, but it was what would probably be considered dirty carnivore, maybe. Um, and on that third month, I knew it was time to transition away from coffee for me, just for me. I'm not saying that's what everybody else needs to do. And that's where it's important to know yourself, know your body, and listen to what your body is saying. And to at least get rid of sweeteners and get rid of dairy. And for me, there was no point for me doing coffee without the sweeteners and the dairy and the heavy whipping cream. So I just decided, you know what? I'm just gonna let it all go, including the coffee. And within those, probably the first 4 weeks of letting go of kind of those last few things that I was still holding on to on carnivore, uh, it was like night and day with my mental health. I was no longer crying and weeping over some of the things that were going on. So a lot of situational things that I was responding to. I didn't have that sense of despair. I didn't have that sense of, you know, just feeling very poorly about myself. I began to just feel this weight, not a physical weight, but just this mental weight that was being lifted off of me. So this weight's being lifted off of me, and it, it's like I stopped hearing the noise in my head, because I think we can all be really good at this negative self-talk very easily sometimes, unless we're intentional about not doing that. And I began to just feel amazing, and it was weird. It was the weirdest thing for me. It was just this feeling of, wow, I'm smiling effortlessly. I'm laughing more. I'm, getting up in the morning feeling good instead of getting up in the morning. Sometimes I would literally wake up crying. And I'm not menopausal, for the record. I am 52, but I am about as regular with my cycle as anyone. And I'm guessing, just based on my age, I'm sure I'm probably, perimenopausal at the very least. So even if those things that I was going through in terms of how I was responding were tied to perimenopause, which I don't think they were, because I have struggled with some of these things in terms of situational overload and being overwhelmed, and how I respond to that for years and years and years and years. Um, but even if it was perimenopause type stuff going on in terms of hormones and all of that, still, it was resolved based on what I was doing nutritionally and eating only meat, fat, butter, eggs, and only consuming water in terms of liquid. And, but it was just like a night and day kind of thing. And it was strange. It was also frustrating. And here's why it was frustrating, because my thought was, if the way I'm eating is what's changing all of this, why don't more people know about this? Why aren't more people being educated on this? Because when I go out and look on YouTube and people who are sharing their stories and their journeys, this is a common thing with people who go carnivore. Keto, yes, you begin to feel those improvements and those changes, but carnivore exponentially, whole different level. And so my thing was, well, wait a minute. What's the deal? Why don't we know more about this? Why is this not common knowledge? Because how I was feeling before versus how I'm feeling now, night and day. Night and day. And so I'm going to talk for purpose of time. I'm just going to kind of leave it there on high level. B will come back in and we'll talk about some specific situations or scenarios recently where, he's noticed the difference. In general, though, I just want to share that I was in a very rough space. And I am floored still daily at how amazing I feel about myself, about life. My prayer life is different now. I mean, even how I pray is different. And that's why I say, prayer is great. I've always believed that. But getting your true healing often also requires that whatever stuff is going on within us that might be physical may require some changes. Otherwise, even if we get that relief through prayer, it may only be temporary if we're still filling our bodies with the things all the time, with the very stuff that is causing the issues. So getting to the root cause of why you're feeling the way you're feeling is critical. And again, I'm only speaking for myself. But when I look out there and see how people talk about carnivore and the experiences that they're having, it resonates so incredibly deeply with me. I sit there and nod my head like, yes, that is me. And so that's why I believe it to be real, and it's not just me, and it's not a coincidence. And it got to the point where the weight loss wasn't even the biggest thing to me. That wasn't the biggest benefit. The greatest benefit was the internal healing of my body physically, because the aches and the pains have gone away, the arthritis type stuff has gone away. Now, I did tear my meniscus several weeks ago, whole different thing that, frankly, I probably would be in way worse shape if it weren't for how I was eating. Still have to have surgery because it's very painful. And I am super busy and running around all the time, and it's not allowing, my body to heal. But I'm just here to say that the weight loss, if I don't lose another pound, and I've lost roughly 30 so far, maybe more, I don't know. If I don't lose another pound, as long as I can keep feeling the way I'm feeling, I'd be okay with that. Now, to be clear, I do want to lose about another 30, 40 pounds. But how long that takes is of no concern to me. As long as I stay on this journey, I know it will happen when it's supposed to happen. And that's if it's supposed to happen. I think my body will decide where it's supposed to level out at. But, I would like to, lose another 30 or 40 pounds. But I can't say enough about feeling at peace, the sense of well-being, the sense of hope and optimism when I'm dealing with challenging situations now, because a lot of the circumstances are still the same in terms of actual circumstances that I'm dealing with, but how I deal with them now looks very different, and how they affect me, it looks very different than it did just 5 months ago. So I just want to encourage anyone who's attempting to be on this journey, please fight for your life. Please continue to, even if you have fallen off 20 times over, get back on. And again, I am not a medical doctor and I'm not providing medical advice, but if that's the decision you've made, I just want to encourage you to stick with it, to start fresh every day and just take it one day at a time. It is worth it. At least it's been worth it for me. It's been worth it for our marriage, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it's been amazing, and I'm just so grateful, so grateful. And yeah. All right, so we were just, before we got started with this segment, I asked my husband, I was like, you have a different wife now than you did 5 months ago, don't you? I don't know if I liked your response.
Well, we got to be honest with the people here.
Okay.
We have transparency.
Okay. So tell your side of your perspective of all of this, the mental health and the differences.
Well, I think in the past that the way she handled things was very um, emotionally charged, and now she's much more calm, just sits back and adapts where things need to be adapted. I'm not a very emotional, very expressive person, so it took
That is
some
so true.
it took some getting used to, but yeah, she's you know she's come a very long way, and through nutrition, we believe she was able to do it, and it's been a great improvement.
Yeah, and I again just when he says emotionally charged, um, well, how would you like to describe that, and under what circumstances? Because when I was talking to the folks about when those things came up, um, it seemed like to me it was when I was overwhelmed, when there was just a lot on my plate and on my shoulders, and it was like just I don't want to say melting down, but in some ways I think it was in my own way a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of a meltdown at times, and not being able to handle everything. Now, outwardly, people who in the professional world who know me and they wouldn't know this. This is where in my safe space this would happen. Um, Immediate family, my husband, they're very familiar, I'm sure.
Well, like I say, you just handle things much more calmly and matter of fact,
Hmm.
and it's like there's no meltdown now. So, in your own way, as you say,
Yeah.
um, and I commend you for the progress that you've made.
Well, thank you.
No problem.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate that he has actually been very um, open with me and recognizing and giving me feedback, positive feedback, um, which is why I think it's important that like what he said in the beginning about this topic being important not just for women, um, but also for the husbands because it makes not just my life better, but it makes our life together better. And when he said in the opener that it wasn't just my mental health that was improved, but his as well, I'll speak to what I've observed in terms of the differences, which is he's more understanding, I think, in over the last several months and being on Carnivore, um, I think you're more patient. I think you are I mean, we generally, I think, had a peaceful marriage and relationship, but there's a different type of peace.
Mm-hmm.
There's a there's a more of a I'd say almost I don't know if I call it more joy, more like we just have more fun together, which we always have, but it's just different. It just seems very just things just seem lighter. And we still deal with, tough circumstances as a couple in terms of things that we have to deal with, like all people in the world deal with. Um, but how we navigate that just seems a lot more. It's done more effortlessly, I guess. Yeah, yeah. So, which I appreciate, and that's why I'm really thankful that he joined me on the journey. And I never had to ask him to, will you do carnivore with me? He saw how it was changing me, and he was like, well, I'm gonna get on this as well because he had some fitness and health goals, and which the running joke now is there are people who don't recognize him at work, but we'll talk about that on another episode. As some of the benefits of being on carnivore, but he is benefiting in terms of his weight loss, but he's also benefiting in terms of his mental health and then on a bigger scale, my mental health. And
Well, like with anything, if you see somebody doing something, you may wonder what they're doing or whatever. Or even if they're trying to force it down your throat or whatever, get you to do it. You only gonna do it like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And then maybe that person will come and be like, well, what are you doing? When they really want to know what's going on.
yeah,
So that's what happened for me. I just sat back and watched. I wasn't really, I'm looking for results here. I'm a results based person. So when I saw it, I was ready to go for the long haul.
yeah,
And a lot of times, you know, when we go through these things, sometimes they're fast or whatever, somebody will comment you, oh, you looking good. You'll just stop and say, oh, I'm good. I made it. I made it. And then you'll go back and revert to your old eating habits and old nutrition. But this, no matter how many people say they don't recognize me or how I look, I'm still moving forward with it.
yeah. Yeah, we did talk about that. That sometimes when we do get results, and then we're like, okay, now I can treat myself
Mm-hmm.
and go back to the old
And
way
it
of
always
eating.
goes back.
Yeah, yeah. And neither one of us has any desire to go back at all. I would not trade in how I feel, how I'm beginning to change in my outward look as well, but most importantly, how I feel. Um, Mentally, physically. I wouldn't trade that in for anything.
Your skin is,
Yeah, our skin looks very different. I probably should start wearing a little makeup on you.
effervescent glow and
Yeah,
all that.
yeah. Um, yeah, so we're just really grateful, and I can't say enough about how it's affected us individually and then together, as a couple. And yeah, carnivore, carnivore has been the real deal for us. So, just like B said, we will be continuing with providing more content. It looks like on a more long-term basis, based on the responses we've been getting, we want to continue to be helpful.
We appreciate you.
Yes, so much, so much. The comments sometimes are a little overwhelming for me in a good way, in that it really warms my heart and just means so much that what we're providing is helpful to people. And so please continue to provide any comments about information that you might want to hear more about as we continue with this. Again, all of our social media handles are now Mr. and Mrs. Carnivore. So thank you to A for coming up with that name and telling us we could use it. So we like it. It's easier probably than NBC because we don't want you to be confused. Is it Black Man Carnivore, Carnivore Man Black? So just Mr. and Mrs. Carnivore. It keeps it simple.
Yeah.
And we can do, you can find us on Instagram that way, YouTube, and Facebook. Please join our private Facebook group. We're going to start doing some things there. And Instagram is growing. So, our followers are growing. I think we just went past 100. Woo! And then subscribe to our Facebook page, and we will begin adding much more snippets of content and also some decent length episodes as well there on the deeper dive around our life on carnivore. So and again, we will continue to be on 8A's channel for as long as she will have us. We appreciate her so much. We appreciate all of you. And one day at a time, just keep doing it one day at a time. And remember what B said, if you don't take care of your health,
somebody else will be given that task.
Mm-hmm.